then I started thinking, I can't keep doing this. Something has to change. I used to use the same CV and cover letter, and I would just send it all out to these companies and that I think that I have a shot with. If the first 10 don't accept me, then what makes me think that the next 10 would?
Welcome back to GenZ Talks, and we're delighted to welcome back a guest for the second time who's going to be discussing the job application process and how young people can deal with rejections, as well as what valuable feedback is required and what valuable information should be in a job advertisement. I'm delighted to welcome back Anjali Varma. Welcome back, Anjali.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting topic, and I've been waiting for a platform to be able to, give my peace of mind.
Yeah, excellent.
And I hope some people find it useful, if ever. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a topic which is often discussed. I've seen plenty of posts from young people on LinkedIn who've discussed their frustrations with companies when applying for a job. So maybe we can start on that point in terms of what are your biggest frustrations with companies when you've been applying for jobs in the past?
Well, for me, initially at least, the biggest frustration was the fact that I needed experience to get experience. So it was very, very paradoxical and frustrating. But over time, I've learned to understand that it's important to remember that all kind of experience is good experience. So whether it is just an internship, whether it is group projects that you did in university, or it's just part-time work, it's important to identify all the transferable skills and be able to convey them. So even if it's something, waiting at a restaurant or waitering at a restaurant or tutoring children, there's always qualities that you can pick, skills that you can pick from there and learn to convey them as something that could be useful to the job that you're applying for. My second biggest frustration is that there's always way too much competition when you're in a fairly big field. And unfortunately, you'll never be the only candidate for the job. There's always so many people. So it's very daunting to, go on LinkedIn, try to apply for something that you can see that over 100 people have already applied for. You really doubt yourself if it's even worth applying at this point. So it's important here to understand that, to remember that when it boils down to it, if you meet the basic criteria of the job requirement, the rest of the work really lies in whether your CV and your cover letter represents your abilities better than the others. So that would be my second point. And lastly, it's a very time-consuming process. And sometimes they really reject you without any proper feedback. So that's extremely frustrating. Some interviews that I've had took 3 rounds, and it's really not easy having to prepare for these interviews, especially when you're still having classes at university, or in my case, I was actually working. So I would have to take time off to do the interview, and the least that you can expect from a recruiter is proper feedback in terms of why they couldn't choose you for the role. So dealing with these rejections, taking time off and not being given the sort of respect that you hoped, it can get really frustrating, and it really discourages you to push forward in that whole intensive job search process.
Well, in terms of the experiences you've had with rejections, how have you been able to deal with it and stay positive, especially when rejections can come thick and fast, confidence can get affected, and we're now in the toughest job market we've been in for years. So young people who've studied hard and put a lot of time in, like yourself, into applications are getting knocked back, and it can have an impact, going forward, and staying confident and keep on proceeding with further applications. So I wonder how you dealt with rejections and what advice you have for young people who are going through what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a year ago, I would not have been the right person to give any advice, because I was extremely down in the dumps when, it was impossible to find something. So I've learned to come to terms with my fair share of rejection letters. Some recruiters would say that my application was not what they're looking for, which was strange because I thought I was the perfect fit as per their job description, at least. So it didn't make sense to me. Some say that they had already gone with another candidate that they liked. Some say they're no longer looking for a candidate. Some don't even respond. But never have I received a single feedback on how I could improve or what was lacking from my side in order for them to have chosen me instead. And as I said, some interviews take 3 rounds to finish, only to result in nothing. Out of, say, like 10 applications now, I'll probably get 1 callback. And this used to be 30 applications and 1 callback when I first started out. So it's tough. Then I started thinking, I can't keep doing this. Something has to change. I used to use the same CV and cover letter, and I would just send it all out to these companies and that I think that I have a shot with. If the first 10 don't accept me, then what makes me think that the next 10 would? All I would do is just open a job offer, click apply everywhere, and then just sit back and complain about how the job market is tough. It doesn't work that way. That's not enough. You have to play it right. Instead of applying to 30 positions, I thought, okay, I'm going to narrow this down to my top 5 positions that I really, really want. Okay, and then I'll devote all my time into making the perfect CV and cover letter that are tailored to these positions. So that's when I would start getting callbacks. So my advice would be that when you deal with rejections, it's not entirely to be just okay with them. Don't just be okay with the rejections, but see what you're doing wrong. Why aren't they calling you back? Are you duplicating your applications to every company? Well, if so, then you have to work on that. You have to work on getting less rejections based on the things that you can control, based on the things that are in your hand, which is your CV, your cover letter, and your application, basically.
Excellent. Thank you, Anjali. And something which is obviously valuable for young people who are applying for jobs on a regular basis is valuable feedback. So they know what steps to take in terms of what they can improve on, or how they can maybe build on further experience so they're in a better place next time to apply for the job. How can companies raise their game in terms of feedback compared to how they're giving feedback now in terms of the majority of companies? Because I've seen on LinkedIn quite a few disgruntled young people who don't feel that companies are doing enough when they've been through the process like you have in the past, maybe 2 or 3 interviews and putting a lot of time for them, but are getting nothing in return after such a lengthy process.
Absolutely. Well, to start with, let's explore why companies are not giving you feedbacks. Well, employers are not legally required to supply candidates with more information than just a yes or no. They usually just send out template rejection letters to the unsuccessful candidates. And they say that, oh, your profile doesn't match, we've gone with another candidate, etc. And in some cases, if you don't hear back, you assume you're rejected, right? And companies never want to take more time to sort of develop and send additional feedback. And they definitely will never call you and talk about your interview if you're rejected. By the time you find out you're rejected, the hiring manager has probably already moved on to the next candidate. So you're no longer a priority to them. Plus, why should they give you free advice on how to improve your application so that you can be an asset to another company? So we have to understand that too. But at the same time, I think it's important for companies to sort of create an environment of goodwill, is that the right word? I would say goodwill, for the in which candidates will, you know, end up telling their friends and social media positive things about their interviewing experience. So I think it's come to a point where the ball is really in the candidate's court. And companies have to realize that it's not always the burden of the candidates alone to set themselves apart, but also the companies. It's also the candidate trying to choose their employer of choice. So I think that it would help companies more if they did provide individual feedback. It helps to sort of convey the company's integrity and their reputation of treating these candidates and eventually their employees with respect. So perhaps if it's, instead of just sending out rejection forms, it would be great to start out giving individualized feedbacks. It doesn't have to, it has to be factual. It doesn't have to be any sort of emotionally based arguments, you know, to avoid any arguments with the candidate. It will help to use sort of examples during the interview, an explanation to describe that the mannerism displayed by the candidate would not be good in an actual job scenario. So we observe here that what candidates actually need is actionable, constructive feedback that they can incorporate in their skill sets. So I don't think interviewers should beat around the bush. I think they just need to tell them straight what it is that they should have done in order to beat that interview. And if the recruiter doesn't know exactly what they wanted, I don't think they will ever hire the best candidate. So it's important to maintain that sort of recruitment culture as well. And of course, I believe that any candidate should be treated as a person, first and foremost. And recruiters in this day and age honestly have the ability to influence careers and lives. And they should take their role more seriously, I feel, in terms of adding value to this job search process. And it builds your company's brand, and candidates would definitely be likely to apply again to another position that's there, or even refer other suitable candidates if they have a good experience with the company. So as much as I think recruiters feel that it's not their priority anymore if they rejected a candidate to give them feedback, I think in the long run it definitely helps their company's brand and values that they convey to the candidates.
Excellent. Thanks, Anjali. And another responsibility a company or a recruiter has is to provide the right information for candidates to be able to submit a proper application. I just wondered what you've seen of the job advertisements in terms of the information that's been provided. Has it been misleading in terms of your experience of jobs you've applied for? How have you found the job advertisements that have been put out in terms of your experience directly with them?
Honestly, most of the job advertisements being put out, I think one of the main things that are missing, like the obvious answer I think everyone would talk about, is the remuneration, the salary bracket. It often helps to know what this job is worth to the company. And I think it would be nice to give the candidates the exact information that they're looking for. I understand that this sort of gives the employer less negotiating power, but as a candidate, I want to know what my compensation will look like before I decide to invest all this time into applying for the position. And here's what it currently looks like, right? The company goes, here's this whole list of things that we want you to do for us, like whole list of responsibilities. In return, you'll get paid, but we won't tell you how much, right? As a candidate, I can't buy what you're selling. This is supposed to be a job advertisement. So that's one huge thing that's always missing, especially in entry-level positions. In more management-level positions, I can often see a salary bracket, which means that they are giving those kind of candidates more respect.
Excellent.
Than they do. Not fair.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important that the recruiters really know a job's day-to-day task. That way they'll know what to focus on in a job advertisement. So for example, if it's an ad for a software developer, the tasks are pretty much same. It doesn't matter which company. So I think it's more effective to maybe emphasize on employee benefits, company culture. That kind of stuff really sways the candidates. They need to convince the candidates to apply. They need to explain to them why it would be a great opportunity. They need to show how this job will actually improve the candidates' lives and career. So that's what they're not doing. It's always about what can you do for us? The company needs to really show what they can do for the candidate. So I would think those would be my top missing things that I find in job advertisements these days.
Great answer. Really excellent value in all your answers today, Anjali. Thanks for joining us again. Just very quickly, in addition to what you've already said, what final words of advice do you have for young people who are going through the process of applying for job after job and who are having to deal with rejections in an environment which is already challenging with the pandemic? What positive words of advice can you give the young people of today?
Of course. I think it's very natural to be affected by the negative events in our lives more than the positive ones. It can be very frustrating to keep getting rejected from the jobs that you dreamed of getting. But I think it's very important to continue trying. And from every job application to another, it's important to change something one way or the other to make sure you really are trying with every angle that you've got. And it's important to remember that, hey, if you make it to the interview stage, you've done extremely well. And if you do make it to the interview stage and they still reject you, it's important that you ask the hiring manager for feedback. This is okay. It's okay to be upfront about it and ask them what went wrong. They owe that much to you. And I think we shouldn't take it personally. It's a very fast track world out there. Employers have to make quick decisions, so we have to be more accepting of that. So instead, we have to just be alert for every job opportunities that come up and be ready to jump at the chance whenever and wherever. It's important to focus on your strengths. It's important to remember and perfect the unique value proposition that you bring to the table. And it's important to always be enthusiastic about that every time you talk to someone. And I think it's also important not to be ashamed, even with your friends. You know, everyone's either gone through it or have gone through it for a very long time in the past. So it's important to have a good self-image about yourself. It's okay that you're not getting a job. It doesn't mean you're not good enough. The job market is tough for everyone. So, reward yourself, meet with your friends, maintain your personal interests, your hobbies, keep your head clear. But at the same time, and finally, always keep the job search in motion. Some big companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, all of these companies, they have huge resources on YouTube by ex-recruiters and interviewers where they really tell you what common interview questions they would ask and how they expect candidates to approach these questions, because they really want candidates to succeed. So it's important to really explore these resources if you're applying to these big companies. Take time, go through it before your interviews. There's nothing wrong in seeming overprepared. It's always better than underprepared. And just remember that, rejections are just setbacks and they're not stopping you from achieving your goals. So I think if you just keep at it, you'll definitely see results.
Thanks, Anjali. Fantastic value as ever. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.